The last normal afternoon, every town has a dark side, not the kind you see in headlines, not the kind splashed across breaking news. The real darkness hides in ordinary afternoons. Some cases haunt us because of violence, because of blood, because of brutality, but the ones that truly stay with you, they're the ones that begin completely normally. This is one of those. It begins on a Thursday afternoon in late spring, the kind of day where nothing feels urgent. Sunlight glints off windshields, traffic hums steadily. People think about dinner plans, errands, softball games, flights to catch. Somewhere along a crowded stretch of highway, dozens of drivers pass the same scene. None of them realize they are looking at the last confirmed moments of a woman's normal life. There are no screams, no shattered glass, no visible panic, just a car on the shoulder, a conversation, and a young woman who disappears in broad daylight. A life interrupted in the spring of 1990. Paige Renkowski was 30 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of easy smile that made strangers feel like old friends. She carried herself lightly, like someone who believed the world was mostly good. Her younger sister would later say Paige had a way of making everything feel softer. She'd do your hair just because she felt like it. Crack a joke at exactly the right moment. She wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, she was steady, warm. She worked at an educational care center while studying child development. She loved structure, loved routines, loved small responsibilities that added up to something meaningful. She was engaged, building a quiet life with her fiancé in a peaceful township. The kind of life that doesn't make headlines. The kind of life that feels permanent until it isn't. May 24, 1990, that Thursday began like any other. Her mother needed a ride to Detroit Metro Airport. A simple favor, an hour-and-a-half drive, time to talk. They left around 11:30 a.m. There was nothing unusual about the drive. No tension, no strange phone calls, no ominous feeling. Just a mother and daughter on a highway, talking about everyday things. At the airport, they hugged goodbye. It was the last time her mother would ever see her. The last normal stops after leaving the airport, Paige met a friend in Canton Township. They walked through a park, bought frozen yogurt, laughed, talked. It was warm outside, calm. Later, she stopped at another friend's house. By around 2:30 p.m., she said goodbye and headed toward her car. She had an appointment later that afternoon. There was no rush, but she needed to get moving. Before merging onto the freeway, she made one final stop at a small party store. The woman behind the counter would later remember her vividly, not because something was wrong, but because Paige stood out. She wore loose, multicolored pants with bold flowers, a long beaded necklace, bright, playful, memorable. They exchanged small talk. The clerk complimented her necklace. Paige bought a 40-ounce beer. She poured some into a fast food cup, resealed the bottle, smiled, walked out between 2:30 and 2:45 p.m. She got back into her silver Oldsmobile. She merged onto Interstate 96 westbound, and for nearly an hour, she was just another car in traffic. The shoulder of the highway the drive home should have taken about an hour. Somewhere along that stretch in Livingston County, something changed. Between approximately 3:15 and 4:30 p.m., Paige pulled onto the shoulder of Interstate 96, roughly a quarter-mile east of an exit. Close enough to safety, close enough to help, but she stopped right there. Later investigation would show the gas tank was full. No mechanical failure, no visible damage, no blown tire, no emergency. So why pull over? That's where the witnesses come in. The maroon minivan drivers passing at 70 miles per hour had only seconds to register what they saw. But several remembered the same detail: a maroon, maybe burgundy minivan, parked near her car. Some said in front, some said behind, but it was close, and Paige was outside her vehicle. She was talking to two men. From a distance, it didn't look violent. One witness remembered her gesturing with her hands, like she was explaining something. Another noticed a man with his hand resting casually on her shoulder. Nothing frantic, nothing obviously threatening, just a conversation. And that's what makes it terrifying. Because evil doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks calm. The badge one witness that day was an off-duty law enforcement officer. As he passed, something caught his attention. He saw a man near the front of Paige's car. The man's arm was extended, as if he were holding something out, displaying it. The officer later said he assumed he was witnessing a traffic stop. Maybe a plainclothes officer showing a badge, and that detail changes everything. Paige's father had worked in law enforcement. She would have been raised to respect authority. If someone flashed a badge, real or fake, would she question it? Or would she comply? Would she step out of her vehicle calmly? Would she believe she was safe? The shoes inside the car? Investigators later found something small but haunting. Her shoes on the driver's floorboard. Driving barefoot isn't unusual, but leaving your car barefoot on a gravel shoulder, without your purse in the middle of a busy interstate, that suggests one thing. She didn't think she was leaving for long. She thought she would be right back. 6:00 p.m. Hours passed, traffic continued, rain rolled through the area. Around 6:00 p.m., a deputy responded to reports of an abandoned vehicle. When he arrived, the Oldsmobile was still running, headlights on, windshield wipers sweeping rhythmically through steady rain, back and forth, back and forth. Inside, her purse, her shoes, the beer, but no Paige. There was no missing person report yet, no obvious sign of a struggle. It looked like someone stepped away briefly. The deputy shut off the engine, locked the doors, tagged it for towing, and left no photographs, no crime scene perimeter, no preserved tire tracks. Rain washed over the shoulder of the road. If there had been footprints, they were gone. The voicemail, meanwhile, her family had no idea. Her fiancé waited for her at a softball game. Assumed she was running late. At her mother's house, a voicemail sat unheard. The sheriff's department had called. They had found her car, but her mother was out of state. The answering machine blinked silently in an empty home. Hours passed when Paige didn't call to say she made it home, something she normally did. Worry began to grow. In 1990, there were no cell phones. Silence meant something. Eventually, the message was heard, and the day shifted. From confusion to dread, the space between moments. This is the part that lingers, because somewhere between 3:15 and 4:30 p.m., on a busy Michigan highway, Paige Rankowski vanished. Not at night, not in isolation, not in some abandoned warehouse, but in daylight, with cars rushing past, with witnesses who saw her with a vehicle that remained behind like a shell. Someone spoke to her. Someone stood close enough to touch her shoulder. Someone may have shown her something that made her trust them. And within minutes, she was gone. No confirmed struggle, no confirmed destination, no confirmed suspects. Just the image of a maroon minivan and a woman who believed she would be right back. The fingerprints no one could name when Steve reported Paige missing. The case shifted jurisdictions from local concern to something heavier. Her car had been found in Livingston County. That meant whatever happened to her happened there. By Saturday, investigators finally processed the silver Oldsmobile as a crime scene. But 2 days had already passed. Rain had fallen. Traffic had roared by. The shoulder of that highway had been disturbed. Inside the car, technicians began working methodically. They had Page's fingerprints on file from routine employment records. Nothing criminal. Just bureaucracy that allowed them to eliminate her prints. And that's when something unsettling surfaced. Roughly 20 other fingerprints scattered across the vehicle. Not smudges, not partial distortions from weather. Clear enough to collect. Clear enough to run. They did not belong to Page. Palm prints were also found on the trunk, positioned as though someone had leaned back against it. Waiting, watching traffic blur past, the prints were entered into law enforcement databases. Nothing came back. No criminal record, no prior arrest, no match. Whoever touched her car that day had either never been caught or had never been printed. The man beside the minivan, as investigators retraced timelines, one detail kept resurfacing: the maroon minivan. Witness after witness described seeing Page speaking to a man near it. Most believed the man was black. Some thought he may have been Hispanic. Descriptions varied slightly: height, build, facial structure, just enough to create uncertainty. Sketch artists were brought in. Over the years, multiple composite drawings were produced. The earliest sketch showed a smaller, framed man. Later, as tips evolved, the description shifted: taller, broader. None of the sketches led anywhere, because when memory is built from seconds at 70 miles per hour, it blurs. And blur is where predators survive. A disappearance in daylight. The case exploded with attention. Not because she disappeared, but because of where she disappeared. A busy interstate. Mid-afternoon. Witnesses present. People saw her standing there. They saw a man with his hand on her shoulder. They saw what looked like a conversation, and they drove on, because nothing looked wrong. That detail, that horrifying normalcy, is what made the case unforgettable. Over 200 tips poured in, each one followed. Search teams scoured rural Livingston County. Cadaver dogs swept fields. Ground-penetrating radar combed wooded areas. Properties were examined. Nothing. It was as if the earth itself refused to speak. The anonymous map then, in 2011, more than 2 decades later, something arrived, an envelope, inside it, a hand-drawn map. Detailed, labeled, precise. It traced directions from the Interstate 96, exit to a wooded patch of land nearby. Accompanying it was a note, cryptic, almost taunting. It suggested the location might be a red herring, but claimed the sender had verified what they could. Verified what? Investigators searched the area thoroughly. They found nothing, no remains, no evidence, no explanation. The map remains one of the case's most chilling artifacts, because someone knew enough to draw it, and someone chose to stay silent. Grief that never sleeps years past. Page's absence did not soften. Her mother became an advocate for missing persons across Michigan. She transformed grief into relentless action. She helped establish the Missing in Michigan Conference. She fought not only for her daughter's case, but for others drowning in unanswered questions. In 2017, she died without knowing what happened to Page. There is something uniquely cruel about that. A mother leaving this world without answers. The serial shadows investigators eventually widened their scope. If this wasn't someone Page knew, maybe it was someone already known to police. Several violent offenders active in Michigan during that period were examined. One was Arthur Rhea, a man with a history of targeting women near roadways. Another was Gary Arties, long suspected in multiple killings. And then there was Samuel Little. At the time of Page's disappearance, his name carried no weight. Years later, he would confess to dozens of murders across the country, including killings in Michigan during that same time frame. Each man was investigated. None could be conclusively linked to Page. Without a body, without DNA, without a witness willing to say more, the case went quiet. Not closed, just suspended. 35 years later then, decades later, something shifted. A separate cold case cracked open. A woman named Beverly Whibble had been murdered in 1989. Her preserved DNA was submitted for forensic genealogy testing in 2024. The results pointed to a man named Buster Robbins. Robbins was arrested, and suddenly, investigators began laying the two cases side by side. The similarities were unsettling. Both women were 30. Both incidents involved Canton Township. In both cases, the victim's vehicle was found running. Purse left behind, shoes still inside. In Beverly's case, her body was later discovered. Paige was never found. There was more. During that period, Robbins drove a vehicle resembling an unmarked police car. Court records showed he had served as a reserve police officer. If he had access to a badge, even temporarily, it reopens that image on the highway, the man extending his arm. The object in his hand, the assumption of authority, the instinct to comply. The complication, despite DNA linking Robbins to Beverly's case, legal proceedings became tangled. His defense argued the DNA proved sexual contact, not murder. A judge declined to immediately bind the case over for trial. Prosecutors appealed. Robbins was held on a $5 million bond. Allegations surfaced during divorce proceedings. Claims of coercive behavior, predatory patterns. Investigators described a disturbing portrait of someone who may have operated for years without being stopped. But suspicion is not proof, and Paige's case remains separate, unproven, unresolved. 3 theories today. Investigators circle 3 possibilities. First, she knew her abductor, but statistically, encountering someone she knew on that stretch of highway at that exact time seems unlikely. Second, a staged accident, but there was no damage, no disabled vehicle, which leaves the third, authority. Someone posing as law enforcement, someone convincing enough to make her pull over before the exit, someone believable enough that she would step out barefoot, leave her purse, leave her life running with the engine, and walk willingly toward danger. By the time she realized something was wrong, it may have been too late. The silence that remains the fingerprints have been run through databases countless times. No match. Whether they match Robbins has not been publicly disclosed, and until that question is answered, the case sits in that terrible space between hope and horror. Paige would be 59 today. She should have grown older, built a career, laughed at new jokes, celebrated anniversaries. Instead, she exists in fragments. A photo, a file, a stretch of highway where drivers still pass every day, unaware of what once happened there. Because somewhere between 3:15 and 4:30 p.m. on May 24, 1990, on a busy Michigan interstate, a woman stepped out of her car believing she would be right back, and she was never seen again.